Hey guys, what's up? So I just saw a story that has actually got me quite angry, and I wanted to just share my opinions on this whole situation. Obviously, with the coronavirus, you've got different aspects of legislation that had to be repealed, and certain decision making has changed according to what people have thought, and these are I have genuine concerns for the state of our NHS post this decision. So the title of this article says Coronavirus, more bereaved families of NHS staff can stay in the UK. So, first hand, my opinion is for those who are actually nurses, I'm not so concerned for because they've had to specialise over at least several years. Many of them have like a nursing degree or the equivalent, which has been quite challenging. Um, so obviously, if they die, that they're if they're immigrants, that their families are able to stay in the UK. They have now tried to extend this to porters, and just basically, it's almost going to be a case of absolutely anyone can stay regardless, and this is what infuriates me. So, the families of overseas NHS support staff and care workers who have died with coronavirus can stay in the UK permanently. That last sentence, that last word, gets on my nerves. It shouldn't be conditional on that. If someone has died, that's their loss. It's tragedy, but you shouldn't be forcing or allowing people to do whatever they like. Under my family member has died, because otherwise you're going to have multiple illegals doing the same. The Home Office bereavement scheme had previously only applied to certain professions, such as nurses. Home Secretary Priti Patel has extended it to cover cleaners, porters, and other low-paid roles after pressure from Labour and the unions. This gets on my nerves. Labour are always very sanctimonious. They think they're better than anything else. They think they're superior. Fighting for people's rights. Actually, this could potentially damage people's rights. If you enable illegals or those who have been on temporary visas to permanently remain in the UK, you're going to end up with a situation where populations overbreed, they expand too much, and then we're still remaining in the same situation where, for example, waiting times for situations like cancer are now at record levels. This is even before the coronavirus situation hit. Many of these people who come from these migrant countries, if you look at any of the statistics, the data, just type in worldometers and type in population, and you will see what these nationalities' breeding stats are like. For example, I think Nigeria is like 5.4 children per household. It's not acceptable. Our population, the whole world's population, is expanding rapidly, and it needs to be stopped. We have far too many people. This is why diseases like this exist, and I'll say it quite clearly. People are dying for a reason. They don't have the right to exist beyond what they feel they can, and just simply overbreeding is just unacceptable these days. It sickens me and makes my blood boil when I hear these stories of people having 13 children when others might not be able to have any, or may have made the conscious decision, because people have gone to that level of extreme, that they'll go childless. This leads to inbreeding, because as only certain family groups expand, the genetic lines get reduced, leading to more likely to breeding with your own family, which is disgusting. It says here, but a free visa extension scheme still does not apply to support staff. This is good because we shouldn't be having extended visas. In a situation we are now, we should be in complete lockdown. No people travelling. The offer of indefinite leave to remain for bereaved families of support staff will be effective immediately and retrospectively, the Home Office said. I don't like that word either. Retrospectively, how long retrospectively? How many years are you going to go back? Traditionally, when they're looking at these types of things, this can be several years back. Or, worst case scenario, even 20 years ago, they could be looking back. I want a clear definition of what retrospectively means. If they've been living here for a year, I don't think they should be given this kind of immunity from deportation. Ms. Patel said every death in this crisis is a tragedy, and sadly, some NHS support staff and social care workers have made the ultimate sacrifice in the pursuit of saving the lives of others. This is another thing I find quite annoying. With many social care workers, it depends on the extent of the social care you're having to do. Some people with autistic behaviour, some people are quite minor. All they will need is kind of like help with maybe planning, scheduling what they do in a day and making things easier that way. On the opposite side of the scale, you do have people who are severely, disabled, barely able to move, and therefore they need more support. But you're not dying in the name of the NHS. People who think that are just going too extreme. There's this whole move to, we need to be saving our NHS. The best way to save it is to stop people abusing it. And many of the people who do abuse it are people who don't have the right to be here. When I announced the introduction of the bereavement scheme in April, I said we would continue to work across government to look at ways to offer further support. Today we are extending the scheme to NHS support staff and social care workers. So the next bit is to do with Labour. The announcement was welcomed as very good news by Labour's Yvette Cooper, who chairs the Commons Home Affairs Committee. She said her committee had been pushing on this for weeks, adding on Twitter that it would be unthinkable to ask family who had lost a loved one on the UK COVID social care frontline to leave their home and the UK. But she said the government now needed to expand free visa extensions to cover care workers, NHS porters, and care workers too. I don't agree with this. The idea of extending visas is just a bad idea. We've got too much of a population as it is. If you've been to some of the areas in and around the UK, we're just flooded with people, and it's just not acceptable to see having anymore. In March, the Home Office brought in a 1-year free visa extension for some staff in the NHS and care sectors. The list was initially limited to NHS doctors, nurses and paramedics. For those eligible, the extension covers visas which expire between the 31st of March and the 1st of October 2020. Those are the people I think are necessary to have extensions to their visas, considering that their trained doctors in this country have to train for a minimum of about 7 years, I think 6-7 years, and paramedics, paramedics not so much, but I would imagine they would have had practical experience for several years before, actually having to work in very difficult situations. I still don't agree with this. NHS fees. Last month, Priti Patel extended the scheme to more NHS staff, including radiographers and social workers, and said some social care staff would also benefit. I can see the point from radiographers because many of them have had to do degrees of at least several years. They actually have knowledge that's required, but the list does not include jobs like porters and cleaners. Again, this is a situation that anyone can do. Porters and cleaners don't really need to be trained that much. Most people generally know how to clean, and I think you can get just ordinary people. You just basically shout out the door on the street, and you can probably have a queue of about 1,000 people looking for a job at this moment in time. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has also rejected calls from Labour and the SNP to scrap the fees overseas health workers have to pay to use the NHS. The health immigration surcharge on non-EU migrants is £400 per year and is set to rise to £624 in October, but the opposition says health workers should be exempt from it. Speaking at Prime Minister's questions, Mr Johnson said he understood the difficulties NHS staff faced, but the country could not afford to scrap the charges in the current economic climate. I very much agree with that. Our NHS has actually been abused significantly for many years because whereas in other countries, say for example Australia, the doctors require you to either provide your health insurance details or to have a credit card on you before they'll actually treat you. There was a case of it was someone from the UK who did a skydive in Australia. It went a bit wrong, and I can't remember the full details, but what happened was he had a bit of a crash landing. He didn't die, but he was quite fatally injured. The stupid guy, I mean, this is partly his fault for not taking the health insurance in the first place. Obviously, with no insurance, doctors said, we're not treating you. If it hadn't been for a GoFundMe page that his family had set up and which was able to raise the money, he would have been left to die. Why this is not happening for others, considering actually with illegal migration and even just too much migration, many of the necessary surgery and hospital appointments that are for UK nationals who might have been paying their taxes for many years. Think of those elderly people who are retired and are still dying now because of the coronavirus situation. Think of how many years they've been paying into the service and seeing no benefit from it. They're seeing their needs taken, crossed out amongst illegals and people who don't have the right to be here. By at least having these surcharges, you're able to kind of plug funding gaps which are necessary at the moment. Now it says here as well, Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds said NHS staff like porters and cleaners and social care staff should never have been excluded from the bereavement scheme in the first place. Now the government also has to change its stance on charging NHS and care staff from overseas to use our NHS. This hypocrisy must end. The GMB union said it was great that its pressure had forced the Home Office to backtrack on offering the right to remain to all bereaved families of NHS and care workers, but union organiser Lola McAvoy urged the Home Secretary to ensure the scheme covered all frontline roles, including part-time workers, in the same way that temporary coronavirus death in service benefits launched last month do. Not only is it the right thing to do, it's also an acceptance that regardless who you work for, where you were born or how much you're paid, if you have fought frontline during this pandemic, you and your family will be supported and treated the same. My last question in regards to this is, what happens to the British that have done this in other countries? Are they going to be given the same situation? Are they actually going to be able to stay if they want to in those countries? Most likely not. My anger towards this is just getting over too much, and I generally think if you do enforce this policy and you see the situation getting worse for the population growth, you might actually get a tax on these nationalities because they're causing this to get worse. They're causing, why do you think this virus is so easily able to spread in those countries? Because they have this tradition of being so close to each other, touching each other, just being, spreading these diseases. We need to take the relevant punishments to many of these countries whose behaviours fly in the face of virus protections, and we need to do that as quickly as possible. The country that needs to be taken to task especially is China, for their role they've played in completely stopping many people's lives and livelihoods. For most people, this is what I always say to my parents. This year, for everyone doesn't exist. For those people who are fortunate enough to have been furloughed and have been working, even if you take into account their incomes, they will be much less than they would have been earning in a regular year. For example, they're given 80% of pay of what they normally would do, but obviously, even if you take that at face value, 20% off, you're not getting your maximum pay. And we don't know how long people are going to remain jobless worldwide or even in this country. I also think that for people in the worst situations as well, they'll be plunged into poverty. I would make this very clear. The UK is by no means as rich as most people like to think it is. We do too much for all these other countries, and we don't see any benefit from it. This is what I find incredibly insulting and ridiculous, and even for those who might be able to, for example, live off savings, like my own situation, I'm still using my savings. So I'm going minus of what I could have been getting had I been in a job. This is a situation that needs to be responded to, and I don't think it's time for being sympathetic to these people. They're taking this opportunity so that they can remain in this country. I was seeing a little bit of this thing to do with Good Morning Britain, which is an ITV show shown in the mornings. It was interviewing this guy who's a cleaner, and he came from Syria. Well, my case in point in that is he came here just so he could get away from the war, which of course we didn't start. It's their own situation, dealing with their own, minister. I think it's like, I don't know whether it's Bashar al-Assad or someone like that. They're having to try and deal with that. That's their own situation, and I don't want to get involved. But why should we be helping these people when they have never helped us? Whatever you think, again, this is one of those things. I don't care whether you put likes or dislikes. It really doesn't bother me. Especially as a UK national, what do you think about this situation? Because all I can see is that queue for NHS waiting is going to be extended indefinitely. People are going to be dying because at the moment, I even say for things like cancer treatments, they're just being delayed, and they're estimating now that for the cases of cancer, because people are too afraid to seek medical attention, they'd rather just die in their homes. At least they know they won't have caught the coronavirus. Would rather be in that situation than to be facing that right now. Leave your comments down below.